He was not supposed to hear anything beneath the water, but the German shepherd did. By the time Sergeant Caleb Walker saw him, the flooded road outside Millbrook, North Carolina, had already disappeared under a moving sheet of brown water. It was just after sunrise, though the sky still looked bruised from the storm, low and gray and heavy, with rain ticking softly against the hood of Caleb's pickup like tired fingers. Pine branches floated past the broken center line. A mailbox leaned sideways, half drowned. Somewhere beyond the trees, a swollen creek roared through the culvert with the deep, hungry sound of something that had forgotten where it was supposed to stop. Caleb had been driving back from an overnight volunteer shift at the evacuation shelter, his boots still damp, his jacket smelling of coffee, wet wool, and diesel from the generators. He had planned to leave town before the second band of rain moved in. He had told himself he had done enough. Then he saw the dog. A German shepherd stood almost 30 yards ahead, chest deep in the floodwater, facing the middle of the road, as if guarding a grave no one else could see. Cars had stopped on both sides. A sheriff's cruiser flashed red and blue through the mist. Two men in raincoats were shouting from the shoulder, one holding a rope, the other waving both arms as though volume could pull the animal to safety. The dog did not move. He was large, sable-coated, with a black saddle darkened by rain and a silvering muzzle that made him look older than his body. His ears were pinned forward. His tail hung low, straight as a warning. Every few seconds he lowered his head toward the water, then lifted it again, eyes fixed on one spot near the flooded culvert. A man tossed the rope. It landed across the dog's back. The shepherd turned, caught it gently in his teeth, and bit through the wet fibers with one clean motion. Not angry, not wild, just certain. Caleb eased his truck onto the gravel shoulder and killed the engine. For a moment he sat there, hands still on the wheel, watching the animal stand against the current. Something tightened beneath his ribs. He knew that posture. Years ago, in another place with hotter dust and louder skies, Caleb had worked beside K-9 teams long enough to learn the difference between fear and focus. A scared dog tried to escape. A trained dog held position. This one was holding. Caleb stepped out into the rain. Cold water immediately soaked the cuffs of his jeans. The air smelled of mud, torn roots, gasoline, and river silt. Sheriff Daniel Brooks turned toward him, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Roads closed, Sergeant. Creek jumped the banks. We're waiting on county rescue. Caleb nodded once, but did not look away from the dog. Who's shepherd? Nobody knows. No collar we can read from here. He wandered in before dawn and won't leave. We tried food, tried rope, tried walking out there. He keeps blocking us. The sheriff lowered his voice. If he stays much longer, that current's going to take him. Caleb took 3 slow steps toward the waterline. The shepherd's head snapped toward him. Amber eyes met Caleb's through the rain. No barking, no growling. Only a stare so direct it felt less like warning and more like recognition. Caleb lifted one hand, palm open. Easy boy. The dog blinked once. Then, without turning away from Caleb, he lowered his muzzle to the water again and let out a sound Caleb felt in his chest more than heard. A thin, broken whine. Not for himself. Caleb's breath slowed. Behind the dog, beneath the brown water, something knocked faintly against concrete. Once. Then again. Maybe debris. Maybe a branch trapped in the culvert. Maybe nothing at all. But the shepherd heard it, and his whole body answered. His paws dug harder into the drowned asphalt. His shoulders trembled from cold and effort, yet he leaned toward that submerged place as if held there by a promise stronger than fear. One of the bystanders muttered, "Dog's lost his mind." Caleb shook his head, barely. "No," he said. He found something. The rain softened for half a second, just enough for the world to grow strangely still. The cruiser lights flashed across the water. Red, blue, red, blue. The German shepherd took one step deeper, nose pointed toward the culvert, and the current slapped against his chest. Caleb heard the knock again. Weak, buried, human in its rhythm. His throat went dry. He looked at Sheriff Brooks. "Get me a rope, a flashlight, and anybody here who can hold a line." The sheriff stared at him. "You think someone's under there?" Caleb was already stripping off his jacket. The cold bit into his arms, but he kept his eyes on the dog. The shepherd had turned back toward the flooded road, refusing every voice that called him away, refusing the storm, refusing the water, refusing to abandon whatever lay beneath it. Caleb stepped into the flood. I think he's been telling us that since dawn. The first step into the flood stole the warmth from Caleb's bones. The water rose above his knees, then pressed against his thighs with a force that made every muscle answer. It was not deep enough to drown a man standing upright. Not yet, but it was fast enough to make one mistake matter. Beneath his boots, the asphalt had vanished. He felt for it through the soles, sliding 1 foot forward at a time, testing the road the way he had once tested loose ground in places where the earth could not be trusted. Behind him, Sheriff Brooks shouted instructions to the men holding the rope. Caleb heard the words, but they came muffled through rain and rushing water. His world had narrowed to the line tied around his waist, the white beam of the flashlight clipped to his shoulder, and the German shepherd waiting ahead like a living marker. The dog did not retreat when Caleb approached. He only shifted his weight, making room without surrendering the place he guarded. Up close, Caleb saw more than rain on the shepherd's coat. There was mud dried in old layers along his legs, a shallow scrape near one paw, and a worn leather collar so dark with water it looked almost black. Something metal hung from it, but the tag was turned inward and hidden against the thick fur of his neck. "Easy," Caleb whispered, though he was not sure whether he was speaking to the dog or to himself. The shepherd's eyes flicked to him, amber and steady. Then his nose dropped toward the water again. Caleb followed the motion. The flooded road dipped near the mouth of the culvert, where the creek had torn through with enough pressure to bend the guardrail. A sheet of water moved over the opening, dirty and restless, carrying twigs, pine needles, plastic bottles, and pale strips of roadside grass. Nothing about it invited hope. The sheriff called from the shoulder. "Caleb, county says 10 minutes minimum." Caleb looked at the culvert. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime when a person had air. It felt like a sentence when they did not. He crouched slowly, letting the water climb to his ribs. The cold punched the breath out of him. He held still until his body stopped fighting it, then lowered one gloved hand into the current, feeling along the submerged edge of the concrete. The shepherd stepped closer, almost touching Caleb's shoulder. A low sound rolled from the dog's chest. Not a threat, not panic, but urgency held tight. Caleb found the culvert rim. Smooth concrete, bent metal. A clot of branches jammed across the opening. Then his fingers brushed cloth. He froze. The water slapped against his side. He reached again and caught the fabric between two fingers, pulling gently at first, then harder when it resisted. Something yellow emerged from the brown water, twisted around a strand of wire and packed with mud. Caleb freed it and lifted it into the rain. A child's raincoat. Small, bright yellow beneath the grime. The kind a parent buys because storms are less frightening when a child looks like sunshine. The shoulder went quiet in a way Caleb felt even over the creek. Sheriff Brooks waited 2 steps closer, his face changing. "Is there a name?" Caleb turned the coat over with numb hands. On the left side, stitched in blue thread above a tiny embroidered fire truck, was one word. "Noah." For a moment, no one moved. Then a sound rose from behind the parked cars, sharp with fear and love. A woman broke through the line of bystanders, wearing blue medical scrubs under a rain jacket, her blonde hair pulled loose from a tired knot, her face pale from the kind of terror that arrives before proof. "Noah," she said, not loudly at first, as if the name had been knocked out of her. Sheriff Brooks turned. "Emily, stay back." But Emily Carter was already at the waterline, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other reaching toward the little coat, as though touching it could change what it meant. "That is his," she whispered. "That is my son's." Caleb felt the air tighten around them. Emily looked from the coat to the culvert, then to the German shepherd. He was supposed to be with Mrs. Harlan. "I got called into the emergency room before dawn. They said he was on the evacuation bus." Her voice cracked, but she did not collapse. Some people broke loudly. Some stood straighter because braking would cost too much time. He had his toy soldier. He always carries it when he is scared. Caleb looked back at the water. The shepherd suddenly pushed past him, not enough to knock him over, just enough to reach the culvert mouth. He plunged his muzzle beneath the surface and came up coughing, then pawed hard at the submerged debris. Caleb grabbed his collar before the current could turn him sideways. "Hold on, boy." The dog fought him for one breath, then stopped. Not because he gave up, because something changed. His ears lifted. His body went still. Caleb leaned closer. The rain tapped his neck. The flood moved around him. At first there was only water, only the dull grinding of branches beneath the road. Then it came again. 3 faint knocks. Slow, uneven, from under the pavement. Emily heard it too. Her eyes widened, filling with a hope so fragile it looked painful. Caleb pressed his palm flat against the drowned concrete, and the German shepherd lowered his head beside him, both of them listening to the same impossible sound. Caleb turned toward the sheriff, his voice calm because fear would not help the boy beneath the road. He is not downstream. Sheriff Brooks stared at the culvert as the meaning settled over everyone. Caleb tightened the rope around his waist and handed the yellow raincoat back toward the shoulder. He is under us. Caleb did not move right away. He stayed half-crouched in the flood, one palm against the submerged concrete, listening as if the whole morning had become a heartbeat. The knocks did not come again. That made them worse. A sound could be explained. Silence had teeth. Emily Carter stood at the waterline with Noah's yellow raincoat clutched in both hands, her face washed pale beneath the rain. Sheriff Brooks had one arm extended in front of her, not holding her back roughly, only keeping her from stepping into a current that would not care how much a mother loved her child. "Caleb," the sheriff called, "talk to me." Caleb lifted his eyes from the water. "There is a pocket under the road." Brooks looked toward the buckled pavement, then toward the culvert mouth where muddy water curled and vanished beneath the asphalt. "You cannot know that." The knocks came from below the surface, not downstream. Caleb pointed to the slight sag in the road, a place where the yellow center line bent out of shape under the brown water. The shoulder washed out first. If part of the roadbed collapsed but the slab held, there could be space underneath. Enough for air, not for long. Brooks swallowed hard. He was a practical man, the kind who trusted radios, maps, rescue crews, and things he could put in reports. But now his eyes went to the German shepherd, who had lowered himself chest deep again and was staring at the same sunken point with a stillness no ordinary stray should have had. "County rescue is still 8 minutes out," Brooks said. "Maybe more if Route 11 is blocked." Caleb already knew what that meant. 8 minutes to arrive. More to unload. More to cut through water and debris. More to decide who was allowed to risk what. Beneath them, a little boy might be counting breaths in the dark without knowing he was counting them. Emily's voice came thin through the rain. "Is he alive?" Caleb turned to her. He did not offer comfort he had not earned. He knocked. Emily closed her eyes, and for 1 second her whole body seemed to lean toward those 2 words as if they were a handrail over a cliff. Then she opened them again. "Noah is 6. He is afraid of dark places." Her mouth trembled, but her voice held. "He sings when he is scared. Old church songs my mother taught him. If you get close, call his name. He will answer if he can." Caleb nodded. Something inside him shifted at that. Not memory exactly. More like a door he had kept shut beginning to breathe at the edges. A flood. A child. A voice that might fade if no one reached it in time. He pushed the thought away and focused on the work. "Sheriff, I need the longest line you have. Tie off to that oak and the cruiser frame. Double knots. I need someone watching the water level at the guardrail. If it rises another 6 inches, you pull me out whether I argue or not." Brooks stared at him. "You always this calm when you are about to do something foolish." Caleb looked at the shepherd. The dog was shivering now, but still would not leave the culvert. Only when a dog makes a better argument than people. A few of the bystanders moved then, not with panic but with purpose. One man ran to a pickup for tow straps. Another opened the back of the sheriff's cruiser and pulled out flares, blankets, and a second flashlight. A woman in a red parka began guiding cars farther back from the flooded dip. The road, which had been a scene of helpless staring minutes before, became a small line of hands trying to matter. Caleb waded closer to the shepherd and finally reached for the metal tag against his collar. The dog allowed it, though his eyes never left the water. Caleb turned the tag outward and wiped it with his thumb. The letters were scratched, dulled by years of weather and use, but still readable in pieces. Search Unit 17. Below that, a name worn almost away. "Ranger." "Ranger," Caleb said softly. The shepherd's ears twitched. The name landed. Not as a guess, as a memory. Caleb felt the change travel through the animal, a slight lift in the head, a tightening of the shoulders, a recognition too disciplined to be joy. "All right, Ranger," Caleb whispered. Show me. The dog stepped forward immediately, pressing his body into the current until the water reached the base of his neck. Brooks shouted for Caleb to hold back, but Caleb moved with him, one hand gripping the collar, the other sweeping beneath the surface. Ranger dipped his muzzle again and pulled at a knot of branches lodged across the culvert. Caleb joined him, tugging free pieces of pine, weeds, and torn plastic fencing. The current stole some of it from his hands. Other pieces spun away, bumping against his ribs before disappearing downstream. Then Ranger stopped. His head jerked toward the right side of the culvert, where the road's edge had crumbled under the water. Caleb followed and saw it. A narrow gap between concrete and washed-out earth, no wider than a mailbox slot, breathing bubbles every few seconds. Not enough for a grown man. Maybe enough for sound. Caleb leaned down until his cheek nearly touched the flood. "Noah," he called, slow and clear. "Noah Carter, my name is Caleb. Your mom is here. If you can hear me, make one sound." Nothing answered. Emily made a small, broken noise from the shoulder, and the sheriff murmured something to her, low and steady. Caleb waited. Rain ran down his face. His fingers numbed against Ranger's collar. Then, from beneath the road, faint as a spoon tapping glass in another room, came one knock. Ranger lifted his head and barked once, sharp enough to cut through rain, radios, and fear. Caleb looked back at Brooks. "He is alive." The sheriff's expression changed. Not relief yet. Relief would be too early. It was belief. Heavy and frightening. Caleb unclipped the flashlight from his shoulder and tightened the rope around his waist. Ranger watched every movement. When Caleb lowered himself toward the culvert mouth, the dog stepped with him. "No," Caleb said. "You stay." Ranger did not obey. He planted both front paws at the edge of the gap and stared into the water like the command had come from somewhere deeper than Caleb's voice. Caleb understood then that this dog had not waded through cold, dawn, and rising water to be dismissed at the door of the rescue. Whatever was beneath that road, Ranger had claimed it as his mission. Caleb gave one short nod. "Then stay close." The shepherd leaned forward, nose to the dark opening, and breathed in. Caleb took one long breath of his own, tasting mud and rain and the old metallic edge of fear. Then he slid one arm into the flooded gap, feeling for the hidden space below the road, while above him Emily whispered her son's name like a prayer that refused to end. Caleb's arm disappeared into the gap up to the shoulder, swallowed by cold water, and the black seemed beneath the broken road. The space was too narrow for his body, too jagged for speed, and too uncertain for comfort. His fingertips found mud, gravel, torn roots, then concrete slick as ice. He pressed his cheek closer to the surface, keeping his mouth above the flood while the current tugged at his ribs. Ranger stood beside him, braced like a statue carved from rain, his nose nearly touching Caleb's sleeve. Every few seconds the dog inhaled sharply, then shifted his paws, guiding Caleb by instinct rather than words. "Left?" Caleb asked under his breath. Ranger nudged his wrist. Caleb moved left. His fingers brushed something smooth and round. Plastic. Small. He hooked it carefully and pulled it free from the underwater pocket. A toy soldier surfaced in his palm, green paint scratched, one tiny arm bent from years of being carried in a child's hand. Emily saw it from the shoulder. The yellow raincoat slipped from her grip and fell against her knees. "That is his," she whispered. "He calls him Captain Brave." For a moment, even the flood seemed to give them room to understand. Noah had been there. Not yesterday. Not some imagined path downstream. Here, under the road. Caleb closed his fist gently around the little figure, then handed it back towards Sheriff Brooks, who waited close enough to take it. "Keep talking to him," Caleb said. "Keep his mother talking." Brooks nodded, his face set now in the hard focus of a man who had accepted the impossible and chosen work over fear. "Emily," he called, "say his name. Tell him what you need him to do." Emily stepped as close as the sheriff would allow, rain streaming down her cheeks so completely that tears had nowhere separate to go. "Noah," she called, her voice shaking but clear. "Baby, it is Mom. I am right here. You listen to me. You tap if you hear me." Silence answered first. Then one faint knock came from below. Emily covered her mouth, and her knees nearly folded, but the woman in the red parka caught her gently under one arm. Caleb looked at the culvert again. The gap was not the entrance. It was a vent, a crack where sound and bubbles escaped. Noah had to be trapped farther inside, in a pocket created when the roadbed washed out beneath the slab. To reach him, Caleb would have to enter through the culvert mouth, clear the branch jam, and follow the narrow channel under the pavement until he found the hollow. It was not heroic when he thought of it. It was simple and terrible. There was a child where a child should never be, and Caleb was the one closest enough to try. County rescue had still not arrived. Somewhere in the distance, a siren rose and faded behind rain and trees. Too far. Caleb turned to Brooks. "I am going in through the culvert." Brooks did not argue at once. That told Caleb the sheriff had reached the same conclusion and hated it. "That pipe is half blocked. You get stuck, we may not be able to pull you back clean. Then do not let the line go slack." "Caleb," the sheriff's voice dropped. "You are not 25 anymore." Caleb almost smiled. "No, that is why I know not to waste breath." Ranger gave a low whine. Caleb looked down and saw the shepherd staring not at the culvert now, but at Caleb's hand, where the mud from the toy soldier still marked his glove. The dog seemed to understand the shape of the decision before any human spoke it. Caleb crouched beside him and finally turned the collar tag fully toward the light. "Search Unit 17. Ranger." Beneath it, another line, worn but not gone. "Lieutenant Aaron Miles." The name meant nothing to Caleb yet, but it carried weight. Names on tags always did. They were never just letters. They were hands that had fed, voices that had called, promises that had been made out loud. Caleb touched the tag once. "You have done this before, have you?" Ranger blinked rain from his lashes and turned back to the water. Brooks and two men secured a second rope around Caleb's chest and shoulders. Someone handed him a waterproof flashlight. Someone else passed a small folding shovel from a truck bed, though there was little chance it would help under moving water. Emily's voice continued, softer now, trembling through an old hymn Caleb recognized from childhood Sundays he had not thought about in years. She did not sing it perfectly. Fear thinned the notes. But she sang for Noah, and maybe for herself, and maybe because some songs are built for places where words alone cannot stand. Caleb lowered himself toward the culvert mouth. The water climbed over his chest, then to his collarbone. Cold wrapped around him with clean, merciless hands. Ranger stepped forward with him until Brooks caught the dog's collar. "No, boy," Brooks said. "You stay with us." Ranger twisted once, not hard enough to harm, only desperate enough to make the leather creak. Caleb paused. The shepherd's eyes locked on him. There it was again, that silent insistence. Not command, not plea, partnership. Caleb took the loose end of a smaller rope and clipped it through Ranger's collar, then tied the other end to his own harness with enough length for the dog to move, but not be swept away. Brooks stared. "You cannot take a dog in there." Caleb looked at the blocked opening, then at the animal who had found every sign before the people did. "I am not taking him," he said. "He is taking me." Brooks held his gaze for one hard second, then let go. Ranger entered first, lowering his body into the brown rush, nose working, shoulders steady. Caleb followed, one hand on the dog's back, the other gripping the flashlight. The culvert swallowed the daylight almost immediately. Behind them, Emily's song blurred into rain. Ahead, the pipe narrowed into darkness, smelling of mud, rust, and trapped air. Ranger stopped twice to pull at branches. Caleb freed what he could and pushed through what he could not. The rope tightened behind him, then eased. Inches became feet. Feet became a world. Somewhere ahead, beneath the road, a child waited with a toy soldier missing from his hand, and Caleb could hear, faint beneath the water and his own breathing, one more knock. The culvert narrowed until Caleb could no longer lift his head without brushing the curved concrete above him. Water pressed against his chest and slid past his shoulders, cold and relentless, carrying grit that stung his skin and tapped against his flashlight like fingernails. Ranger moved ahead with careful confidence, not swimming, not walking, but working through the flooded darkness as if every inch of the pipe had been drawn for him by scent alone. The small rope between them tugged once, then slackened. Caleb followed, breathing through his mouth, keeping one hand against the wall and the other near Ranger's back. The dog stopped where the branch jam thickened. His ears flattened, his body lowered. Caleb angled the flashlight forward and saw a tangle of pine limbs, grass, and washed-out fencing wedged across the pipe. Beyond it, there was only black water and the thin glimmer of trapped air trembling against the top of the concrete. "Easy," Caleb whispered. His voice sounded small inside the culvert, swallowed by the rush beneath him. Ranger reached into the tangle with his teeth and pulled. A branch shifted. Caleb grabbed it and worked it loose inch by inch, careful not to let the whole jam break free at once. Too much movement could change the pressure under the road. Too much force could steal the last pocket of air from wherever Noah waited. Outside, the rope tightened twice, a signal from Sheriff Brooks. Caleb tugged back once. Still here. Still moving. Ranger pulled again, then froze. Caleb froze with him. Through the pipe came a sound so faint it seemed less heard than remembered. Not a knock this time. A voice. Small. Shaking. Far away. "Mom." Caleb closed his eyes for half a second. Not in prayer exactly, but close. Then he lowered his face toward the gap above the water. "Noah," he called, calm and strong, letting the pipe carry his words. "My name is Caleb. Your mom is right outside. She is singing for you." There was a pause. Water hissed between them. Then the child's voice came again, broken by distance and fear. "It is dark." Caleb swallowed the ache that rose in his throat. "I know, buddy. But you are not alone anymore." Ranger gave one soft bark, gentle enough that it did not echo harshly. From somewhere ahead, Noah made a sound that was almost a sob and almost a laugh. "Dog." "Yes," Caleb said. "His name is Ranger. He found you." The dog pushed forward at the sound of his name, shoulders straining, nose working faster. Caleb cleared another branch, then another. Mud clouded the water until the flashlight beam became a pale smear. The pipe bent slightly to the right, and beyond the bend Caleb saw the place where the world had gone wrong. The culvert wall had cracked near the top, opening into a low hollow beneath the roadway. Part of the soil had washed away, leaving a cramped pocket between concrete, roots, and the underside of the asphalt slab. Air had collected there, just enough to keep a small child alive. Ranger climbed onto a mound of lodged debris and stretched his neck toward the opening, whining deep in his throat. Caleb edged closer, every movement slow. "Noah, can you see any light?" "A little," the boy whispered. "I see the dog." Caleb raised the flashlight higher. There, tucked in the pocket like a bird fallen into a drain, was Noah Carter. 6 years old, small in a blue sweatshirt, damp hair stuck to his forehead, one cheek muddy, both arms wrapped around himself. His lips trembled from cold. His eyes were wide, but open, alive. Caleb had seen many kinds of courage in his life. Loud courage, proud courage, the kind men talked about later over coffee and silence. But this was different. A little boy in the dark, answering when called. Holding on because his mother's voice had reached him through rain and concrete. Caleb kept his face steady. "There you are," he said softly. "You have been doing a good job, Noah." Noah looked at Ranger. He stayed. "Yes, he did." I heard him scratching. Ranger stretched farther, nose nearly touching the boy's shoe. Noah reached one shaking hand toward him, but could not bridge the gap. Caleb studied the opening. Too narrow to pull Noah straight through while the debris remained. Too unstable to dig quickly. Water lapped at the lower edge of the pocket. It was rising, not fast, but steady. Caleb looked back the way he had come. The culvert seemed longer now. Darker. The rope to the outside trembled in the current. He needed help, and help was still minutes away. He needed time, and time was leaving through every ripple. "Noah," Caleb said, "I need you to listen carefully. I am going to make more room. Ranger is going to stay right here with you. Do not leave." The words came so small Caleb nearly lost them under the water. Caleb leaned closer, bracing one hand on the concrete. "I am not leaving. Marines do not leave people behind." Noah's eyes filled, but he nodded. Ranger lowered himself at the opening, his face inches from the boy's hand, breathing slow and steady as if teaching the child how. Caleb reached into the debris and began clearing the packed branches one careful piece at a time. Each pull made the pocket groan softly. Each groan made Noah flinch. Caleb kept talking through it, telling him about the rain outside, about his mother waiting, about the warm blanket he would get, about hot chocolate with extra marshmallows when this was over. He did not know if any of it would be true. He only knew hope sometimes needed a shape small enough for a child to hold. Then Noah whispered, "Mr. Caleb? I am here." I dropped Captain Brave. Caleb looked at the empty little hand, then thought of the toy soldier, now safe with Sheriff Brooks. Your captain is outside guarding your mom, Caleb said. He did his job. Now you do yours. What is my job? Keep breathing. Keep looking at Ranger. Keep listening to my voice. The boy nodded again. Ranger's tail moved once beneath the water, slow and certain. Caleb freed another branch. The opening widened by an inch. Maybe two. Outside, faint through the pipe, a new sound arrived. Sirens. Closer now. But beneath that came another sound, low and troubling, from somewhere above them. A deep shift in the roadbed. Caleb felt it through his palm before he understood it in his mind. The hollow was changing. The water had eaten more earth away. Ranger lifted his head sharply. Noah's eyes widened. Caleb kept his voice calm, though his heartbeat had begun to count down. Noah, he said, reaching both arms toward the pocket. When I tell you, you crawl to me. Not fast, not scared, just straight to my hands. The boy stared at the dark water between them. I cannot. Ranger whined and pressed his nose against the child's fingers. Noah touched him at last, barely, but enough. Something passed through that small contact. Trust, warmth, a reason. Caleb saw the boy take one trembling breath, then another. Yes, you can, Caleb whispered. Ranger came all this way because he knew you could. The sound above them came again, deeper this time, not loud, but wrong. It moved through the concrete like a tired groan, and Caleb felt Noah's small pocket of air tremble around them. A few crumbs of muddy soil slipped from the edge and tapped into the water. Noah pulled his hand back from Ranger's nose, eyes wide, his breath turning quick and shallow. Caleb kept his own face still. Fear was allowed inside his chest, but not in his voice. Look at me, Noah. The boy tried, but his gaze kept darting upward. Is the road falling? The road is tired, Caleb said. So we are going to stop asking it for extra time. Ranger shifted at the opening, planting his paws into the lodged debris as though he understood every word. His wet fur brushed Caleb's arm. The dog's warmth was faint but real in that cold pipe, a living pulse against all that water and stone. Caleb reached both hands into the narrow space. The opening was still too tight. Noah could get his shoulders through if he turned sideways, but the edge beneath him was cluttered with roots and small branches. Caleb needed to clear just enough. Not perfect. Perfect was a luxury. Alive was the goal. Behind him, the rope tugged twice, harder than before. Sheriff Brooks was signaling that rescue crews had arrived, or the water had risen, maybe both. Caleb did not have a free hand to answer. He braced one boot against the culvert wall, leaned in, and pulled a twisted length of fencing from the lower edge of the gap. It scraped against concrete with a harsh metallic cry that made Noah flinch. Ranger barked once, softer than before, steadying. Caleb glanced at the dog. Keep him with us. Ranger lowered his head again until his nose was inches from Noah's fingers. The boy touched him, just the tips at first, then rested his small palm against the shepherd's muzzle. Ranger did not move. He breathed slowly, patiently, like a lighthouse, choosing not to blink. Caleb freed another root. The opening widened. Water sloshed into the hollow, climbing around Noah's sneakers. It is getting cold, Noah whispered. I know. My feet feel funny. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed gentle. That means it is time to move. You are going to come toward me like you are crawling through a blanket fort. Do you ever make those? Noah blinked. The question reached him through the fear. With couch pillows. Good. This is just the worst blanket fort in North Carolina. And Ranger is waiting at the door. A tiny, trembling breath left the boy. Not quite a laugh. Close enough to matter. Caleb heard men shouting faintly from outside now, voices magnified and warped by the culvert. A rescue worker called his name. Sheriff Brooks answered. Emily's voice rose above them all, singing again, thinner in the rain but still there, carrying the melody like a candle cupped against wind. Noah heard it. His eyes shifted toward the sound. Mom. She is right there, Caleb said. And she needs you to crawl to me. The boy nodded, but his body did not obey. Caleb knew that look. Panic could turn the smallest space into a mountain. He leaned closer. Noah, give Captain Brave an order. Noah's lips parted. What? You told me he is a captain. Captains give orders. The boy swallowed. What order? Tell him you are going home. Noah looked at Ranger, then toward the darkness beyond Caleb, as if imagining the toy soldier outside with his mother. His voice came small but clearer. Captain Brave, I am going home. Caleb reached farther. That is right. Now come to my hands. Noah lowered himself onto his stomach in the cramped hollow. The movement sent a ripple through the water, and the road above them answered with another low shift. Caleb ignored it. Ranger did not. The shepherd snapped his head upward, then back to Noah, whining deep in his throat. Caleb stretched until his shoulders burned. Slow, buddy. One elbow. Good. Now the other. Noah slid forward an inch, then stopped when his sweatshirt caught on a root. I'm stuck. Not stuck. Just paused. Caleb reached in, fingers searching by touch, found the snag, and tore the fabric free without pulling the boy too hard. Again, Noah moved. 1 inch. 2. His small hand found Caleb's glove. Caleb closed around it carefully, not yanking, only anchoring. I have you. Noah began to cry then, quiet and exhausted. I want my mom. You are going to see her in just a minute. Caleb shifted his grip under Noah's arm. The opening pressed against the boy's shoulders. Too tight. Caleb turned him gently. Sideways. Like you were sliding between 2 pews at church. I do not like this. I would be worried if you did. Ranger nudged Noah's other hand, and the boy clung to the wet fur at his neck. Caleb felt the dog brace. Not pulling. Supporting. Letting the child believe there was something strong enough to hold. Together, inch by inch, they brought Noah through the gap. His shoulders cleared. Then his chest. The water in the culvert reached his waist, and the cold stole the breath from him in a sharp gasp. Caleb immediately drew him against his own body, keeping the boy's face above the surface. That is it. I have you. Ranger has you. Outside, the rope tightened again, urgent now. Caleb gave one hard tug back. Pull slow. He tucked Noah against his chest, turned carefully in the cramped pipe, and realized the passage behind them had changed. The branch jam they had cleared was shifting in the current, sliding back across their exit like a door trying to close. Ranger saw it first. He lunged forward and seized a branch in his teeth, holding it aside while the water rushed around his shoulders. Caleb moved. There was no room for grace, only purpose. He pushed Noah ahead of him, one arm wrapped around the boy, the other feeling for the rope. The current caught Caleb's side and twisted him into the wall. He absorbed it, keeping Noah high. The boy coughed, scared but breathing. Close your eyes, Caleb said. Think about your mom's song. Ranger backed through the pipe in front of them, still gripping the branch, paws scraping for purchase. The shepherd's body shook from effort, but he refused to release until Caleb and Noah passed the worst of the blockage. Then the branch tore free and vanished past them into darkness. Ranger stumbled, recovered, and pressed against Caleb's leg as if asking whether the child was still there. He is here, Caleb breathed. Keep going. The daylight at the culvert mouth appeared as a gray oval ahead, blurred by rain and flashing red and blue. Voices grew louder. Hands reached into the pipe. Sheriff Brooks was on his knees in the water, rope wrapped around one forearm, face soaked, eyes fixed on the boy. We see you, he shouted. Bring him to me. Caleb lifted Noah as high as he could. The rescue workers caught the child first, gentle hands under his arms, a blanket already open behind them. Emily screamed his name, not in terror now, but in the fierce disbelief of a mother seeing the world give back what it had almost taken. For one shining second, Caleb thought they had made it clean. Then Noah went limp in the rescuer's arms, his head falling against the blanket, his small body, too, still beneath the rain. Emily's cry changed. Sheriff Brooks turned sharply. Caleb tried to climb out after him, but his legs faltered in the cold water. Ranger pushed past, scrambling onto the flooded road, shaking, stumbling, then dragging himself toward the place where they laid Noah down. The German shepherd reached the boy before Caleb did. He lowered his soaked head beside Noah's hand and let out a sound so soft it barely rose above the rain, a broken whine that sounded almost like a plea. Caleb pulled himself onto the road, chest heaving, and looked at the child they had fought the water to find. Around them, the storm seemed to hold its breath. Ranger stayed beside Noah, as if the whole world had narrowed to the rise and fall that was not yet there. The rescue workers moved quickly around the boy, voices low and urgent, hands careful, blankets opening like wings over the wet pavement. Emily knelt, so close Sheriff Brooks had to hold one arm gently across her shoulders, not to keep her away from her son, but to keep space for the people trying to bring him back from the edge. Caleb crawled the last few feet on his hands and knees, water streaming from his sleeves, his breath coming hard in the cold morning air. He had seen stillness before. He hated how quiet it could make everything around it. Noah lay on his back beneath the gray sky, small and pale, his blue sweatshirt dark with floodwater, his lashes resting against his cheeks. The yellow raincoat sat nearby in the mud, bright and useless as a fallen flag. One rescue worker checked for breathing. Another reached for equipment. Emily whispered her son's name once, then again, each time softer, as if loudness might scare the moment away. Caleb forced himself upright. His legs shook, but he moved to Noah's side and met the eyes of the nearest medic, a broad-shouldered man in a county rescue jacket. No words passed between them at first. They did not need many. There was work to do. Caleb placed his hands where he had been trained to place them, steady and exact, while the medic prepared the breathing mask. He counted under his breath, not fast, not frantic. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Again. Rain collected on Noah's forehead and rolled into his hair. Ranger lowered his muzzle to the boy's hand and gave one soft whine. Emily pressed both hands to her mouth. "Please," she whispered. "Not to anyone visible. Maybe to God. Maybe to the road. Maybe to every second her child had held on beneath it." Sheriff Brooks stood over them with his hat in one hand now, rain silvering his gray hair. His radio crackled at his shoulder, but he did not answer it. All down the flooded road, people had gone silent. The man who had brought the tow straps stood with his palms clasped. The woman in the red parka held Captain Brave, the little green toy soldier, against her chest like it too needed warmth. Even the siren of the rescue truck seemed to fade behind the hush. Caleb kept counting. His arms burned. His chest ached from the cold pipe and the memory rising behind his ribs. Years ago, in a flash flood half a world away, he had reached for someone and come back with empty hands. He had carried that emptiness in silence until it learned the shape of him. He had told himself some doors did not open twice. But now there was Noah and the dog, and a mother's him trembling in the rain, and Caleb would not stop while there was still a breath left anywhere in the morning. "Come on, buddy," he said, voice rough but steady. "You did the hard part. Come back the rest of the way." The medic leaned close with the mask. Another cycle. Another breath. Noah did not move. Emily made a sound that seemed to leave her whole body. Ranger suddenly lifted his head. His ears came forward. Not toward the people. Not toward the road. Toward Noah. The dog stared at the boy's face, then placed one paw, wet and trembling, beside Noah's open hand. He did not climb onto him. He did not interfere. He simply stayed close enough that the child's fingers brushed his fur. Caleb noticed the contact. So did Emily. Her eyes widened through tears. "Noah," she whispered, leaning closer without crossing into the worker's space. "Ranger is here. The dog is here, baby. You found him, remember? You promised Captain Brave you were going home." Caleb began again. 1, 2, 3. The numbers became less like counting and more like prayer. At 27, Noah's fingers twitched. It was so small Caleb almost thought the rain had moved them. Ranger did not. He gave one sharp bark that snapped every head toward the boy. Caleb paused only long enough to see Noah's throat shift. Then the child coughed. Once. Weak. Then again, harder. Water spilled from his mouth, and the medic turned him carefully to the side, speaking calm words as Noah dragged in a thin, ragged breath that sounded to everyone there like the first note of a hymn. Emily cried out, and this time Sheriff Brooks let her come forward as the medic nodded. She gathered her son's hand in both of hers, not pulling him away, just holding the part of him she could touch. Noah's eyes fluttered, unfocused at first, then searching. "Mom." The word was barely there. It was enough. Emily bent over his hand and wept into the rain. Caleb sat back hard on the pavement, all strength leaving him at once. He looked at Ranger. The shepherd had lowered his head again, eyes half closed, body shaking from cold and exhaustion. But his tail moved once, slow against the water. Not celebration. Completion. County Rescue lifted Noah onto a stretcher and wrapped him in warm blankets, checking him as they moved. Emily walked beside him, one hand never leaving his. When they placed Captain Brave against Noah's chest, his small fingers curled around it. Caleb watched the ambulance doors open, watched the boy disappear into light and warmth, watched Emily turn at the last second and look back at Ranger with a gratitude too large for words. Only then did Caleb notice the dog had not followed. Ranger stood near the edge of the flooded culvert, staring at the water again. His job should have been finished. Noah was alive. His mother was with him. The road was full of people now, but the shepherd's posture had changed. Not urgent this time. Heavy. Remembering. Sheriff Brooks came to Caleb's side, breathing hard, his uniform soaked through. "That dog saved him," he said quietly. Caleb did not answer. His eyes were on the metal tag hanging from Ranger's collar, the name beneath the scratches catching a flash of cruiser light. Lieutenant Aaron Miles. Brooks followed his gaze. The sheriff's face slowly lost its color. "I know that name," he murmured. Caleb turned to him. Brooks looked from the tag to the flooded road, then to Ranger, who still watched the water as if listening to ghosts beneath it. 3 years ago, the sheriff said, voice low enough that only Caleb could hear. Different county. Same kind of storm. Marine rescue volunteer. Canine handler. He went into floodwater after 2 kids near a washed-out bridge. The children made it home. Brooks swallowed. Lieutenant Miles did not. Caleb looked back at Ranger. The shepherd stood in the rain, older than he had seemed an hour ago, his sable coat dripping, his amber eyes fixed on the brown current. Not lost. Not confused. Waiting for a voice that would never call him back. Caleb felt something inside him go very still. This had never been just instinct. It had been memory with pause. A promise that had survived 3 years of roads, storms, hunger, and silence until another child needed the same mercy. Ranger had not refused to leave the water because he was stubborn. He had refused because once, someone he loved had gone into a flood and never returned, and this time the dog was determined that the story would end differently. The ambulance pulled away with its lights flashing against the rain, carrying Noah and Emily toward Millbrook General, and for the first time since dawn the flooded road felt too quiet. The siren faded behind the trees until only the creek remained, rolling beneath the broken pavement with a voice that sounded less angry now, almost tired. Caleb stayed seated on the wet asphalt, elbows on his knees, water dripping from his hair and sleeves, watching Ranger stand near the culvert as if the dog still owed something to the water. Rescue workers moved around them in slow, practical patterns. Cones were set. Radios spoke. A county engineer pointed toward the sagging roadbed and shook his head. Sheriff Brooks gave orders with a steadiness that did not reach his eyes. Everyone had work to do, but every few seconds someone looked back at the German shepherd. No one said much. Some moments do not tolerate noise. Caleb rose carefully, his legs stiff from cold, and walked toward Ranger. The dog did not turn until Caleb was close enough to touch him. Up close, the old shepherd looked smaller than he had in the flood, not weak, just spent. Mud clung to his legs. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. The worn tag on his collar rested against his wet fur, catching pieces of red and blue light from the cruiser. Search Unit 17. Ranger. Lieutenant Aaron Miles. Caleb crouched beside him. "You knew this road," he said softly. Ranger's amber eyes shifted toward him, then back to the water. Sheriff Brooks came to stand a few feet away, hat in his hands, rain running down the lines of his face. "After Lieutenant Miles died, they searched for his dog for weeks," he said. "Posters, county alerts, volunteers. The family said Ranger slipped his lead during the memorial service. They thought he ran into the woods chasing a scent." Brooks looked at the flooded culvert. Maybe he never stopped chasing it. Caleb rested one hand lightly on Ranger's back. The dog did not lean in at first. He stood rigid, listening to a place that had already given back the child. "Did Miles have family?" Caleb asked. "A sister in Raleigh. Parents passed before that. He was from around here originally. Folks said he came home after leaving active duty and helped with rescue work whenever storms hit. Quiet man. Good man." Brooks paused. People remembered the children he saved. They did not know what to do with the dog he left behind. The words settled into Caleb like cold water finding a seam. He thought of the names men carried home. The names stitched into uniforms, pressed into metal, folded into flags, spoken once at ceremonies, and then swallowed by everyday life. He thought of Ranger wandering through back roads and fields, living on scraps, following storms, waiting for the shape of the old mission to return. A dog does not understand retirement. A dog does not understand memorial speeches. A dog understands scent, voice, duty, and the last place love disappeared. Caleb scratched gently behind Ranger's ear. This time, The shepherd's eyes closed for half a second. Not surrender. Permission. A rescue worker approached with a wool blanket and a bowl of water. He needs a veterinarian, the man said. Maybe hypothermia, maybe a bad paw. We can transport him with animal control. At the words animal control, Ranger's body tightened. Caleb felt it beneath his palm. The dog took one small step backward, not toward the road, not toward escape, but toward the culvert again, as if any cage might be another kind of abandonment. Caleb stood slowly. No, the rescue worker blinked. Sir, I will take him. Brooks looked at him. Caleb, you sure? Caleb watched Ranger, the way the dog's ears flicked at his voice, the way exhaustion had not softened the stubborn dignity in his posture. He pulled me to that boy. He held the line when I could not see. He has earned a ride in the front seat, not a kennel in the back of a truck. The rescue worker nodded once, understanding more than the words. He handed Caleb the blanket. Caleb opened it carefully and draped it over Ranger's back. For a moment the dog flinched, then stood still. Warmth, when life has taught you to expect loss, can feel like a trap before it feels like mercy. Caleb did not rush him. He simply waited, one hand resting near the collar, breathing slowly until Ranger's own breath began to match. Across the road, a firefighter held up Captain Brave, the little toy soldier, sealed now in a clear evidence bag only because people needed procedures when miracles left objects behind. Caleb smiled faintly. Noah would want that back. He imagined the boy in a hospital bed under warm blankets, Emily beside him, both of them listening to doctors explain how close the water had come and how impossible his survival seemed. But Caleb knew there had been nothing impossible about the dog's choice. It had been loyalty doing what loyalty does, staying after everyone else leaves. A county truck arrived to close the road completely. The engineer warned that the pavement could give way if anyone remained too close. Brooks ordered the last bystanders back. The woman in the red parka made the sign of the cross before walking to her car. The man with the toe straps wiped his face with both hands and looked embarrassed to be crying in the rain. Caleb guided Ranger toward his pickup, moving slowly because the dog limped on his right front paw. At the passenger door, Ranger stopped and looked back one final time. The flooded road lay empty now, its broken centerline disappearing beneath brown water, its culvert breathing foam and rain. No child called from below. No hidden knock answered. Only the creek remained. Ranger lowered his head. Caleb understood without being told. Some places become graves even when no body rests there. Some become chapels because love refused to leave. He made it home today, Caleb said quietly. The boy made it home. Ranger stood still. Then, with a sound almost too soft to hear, he exhaled and turned away from the water. The heater in Caleb's pickup worked slowly, breathing warm air into the cab while rain traced crooked lines down the windshield. Ranger lay across the passenger seat with the wool blanket over his back, too tired to sit upright, but not too tired to watch the road. Every time the truck passed standing water, his ears lifted. Every time a siren sounded in the distance, his eyes opened wider. Caleb noticed, but said nothing. Some wounds did not need questions. They needed miles, warmth, and someone willing to stay quiet. At Millbrook Veterinary Clinic, Dr. Hannah Reed met them at the side door before Caleb could knock. She was in her early 40s, fair-skinned, with tired blue eyes and gray-blonde hair tied under a navy clinic cap, the kind of woman who looked gentle until an emergency required command. Sheriff Brooks had called ahead. She examined Ranger with careful hands, speaking softly while the dog watched Caleb instead of her. His paw was strained, his temperature too low, his body lean from too many hard weeks, maybe months, on his own. But his heart was strong. Hannah listened to it through the stethoscope and smiled with wet eyes she tried to hide. This old boy has been carrying a mission longer than most people carry a promise, she said. Caleb stood beside the table, one hand resting where Ranger could see it. Can he recover? With rest, food, and someone patient. Hannah looked at the shepherd's collar tag. Yes, but he will need more than a place to sleep. Caleb understood. Shelter was wood and walls. Home was different. 3 days later, Noah Carter woke fully beneath clean white blankets at Millbrook General, his small hand wrapped around Captain Brave. The doctors called his survival remarkable. Emily called it mercy. Caleb did not correct either word. He came by in the afternoon with permission from the nurses, wearing dry jeans, a Marine Corps sweatshirt, and the expression of a man uncomfortable being thanked. Ranger came with him, moving slowly on his bandaged paw, his coat brushed clean for the first time in what looked like years. When the dog entered the room, Noah turned his head on the pillow. For a second, his face was still pale and uncertain. Then he smiled. Not a big smile. Not the kind made for pictures. A tired little lift at the corner of his mouth that changed the air in the room. "Ranger," he whispered. The German shepherd crossed the floor with surprising care, rested his chin on the edge of the bed, and closed his eyes when Noah's fingers touched his ears. Emily stood near the window, arms folded tightly over her chest, tears running freely now that her son was safe enough for her to cry. Caleb looked away, giving the moment privacy. Noah lifted Captain Brave a few inches. "He guarded Mom?" Caleb nodded. "He did." Noah looked at Ranger. "And you guarded me." Ranger gave a soft huff, the closest thing to an answer he seemed willing to offer. A week after the storm, the town gathered at a small veterans memorial just outside Millbrook, where wet grass shone under a clean morning sun. The floodwater had receded. The broken road remained closed, marked by orange barriers and fresh gravel, but the sky looked washed and new, as if the storm had taken its anger with it when it left. Sheriff Brooks had found Lieutenant Aaron Miles's sister, Rebecca, a schoolteacher from Raleigh with the same quiet eyes Caleb imagined her brother must have had. She brought a folded photograph of Aaron in uniform, kneeling beside a younger ranger. In the picture, the dog's muzzle was dark, his ears sharp, his whole body bright with purpose. When Rebecca saw him now, older and silver-faced, she pressed one hand to her mouth. Ranger recognized her scent before her voice. He walked to her slowly, then leaned his head against her leg. Rebecca bent over him and whispered his name as though giving it back. No one rushed them. Even Noah stood still, holding his mother's hand, watching with the solemn patience children sometimes find after fear has made them older by a few days. At the base of the memorial, Rebecca placed Aaron's photograph beside a small bouquet of white lilies. Then Caleb unclipped Ranger's worn tag from the old collar. He did not remove the collar itself. That belonged to the years the dog had survived. But the tag, scratched and dulled by weather, belonged here too. He laid it gently beneath Aaron's name. Ranger watched the movement, ears forward, body still. For a moment, Caleb wondered if the dog would step back toward the road, toward the old search, toward whatever part of him had lived inside that last unfinished day. Instead, Ranger sat beside Caleb. Not in front of the memorial. Not alone. Beside him. Rebecca smiled through tears. "Aaron would have liked that," she said. Caleb looked down at the shepherd. "I think Aaron sent him where he was needed." No one argued. Some statements are not meant to be proven. They are meant to be lived with. Later, when the small gathering drifted away, Emily brought Noah over. The boy walked carefully, still recovering, but stubborn about doing it without being carried. In his hands he held the yellow raincoat, washed now, still torn near the sleeve, the name Noah stitched above the little fire truck. He handed it to Caleb. "Mom says we are going to frame it," he said, "but I wanted Ranger to see it first." Ranger sniffed the coat, then touched his nose to the embroidered name. Noah placed one hand on the dog's head. "You can come visit me, right?" Caleb glanced at Emily, then at Rebecca. Rebecca gave a small nod, the kind that hurt and healed at the same time. She had found what remained of her brother's partner, but she also understood that Ranger had chosen his next place to stand. Caleb rested his hand on the shepherd's back. "He is coming home with me," he said. "But yes, we will visit." Noah accepted this with grave approval. "Good. He likes marshmallows." Emily laughed through tears. Caleb smiled. Ranger wagged his tail once, as if marshmallows were a reasonable condition of friendship. That evening, Caleb drove home with Ranger in the passenger seat again, but this time the dog did not tense at every ditch or puddle. The sun was setting over the pine trees, turning the wet fields gold. On the floorboard lay a new leash, a bag of food from Dr. Reed, and a clean blanket Emily had insisted they take. Ranger rested his head against the seat, eyes half closed, the old collar still around his neck, lighter now without the tag. Caleb reached over and scratched behind his ear. "No more flooded roads today," he said. Ranger sighed. It was a long sound, heavy with miles. Then, for the first time since Caleb had met him, the shepherd slept before the truck stopped moving. Caleb kept one hand on the wheel and the other near the dog, driving through the soft American dusk toward a porch light he had not cared about in years. Behind them, a child was alive. A mother was singing again. A Marine no longer felt quite so trapped beneath the weight of what he had failed to save. And a dog who had waded in the water finally had somewhere dry to rest. Some stories do not end with thunder. They end with an old shepherd asleep in the passenger seat, a man driving slower than he needs to, and the quiet grace of a promise finally kept.